Welcome to the Widowed Mom Podcast, episode 269, When Your In-Laws Don't Agree.
Welcome to the Widowed Mom Podcast, the only podcast that offers a proven process to help you work through your grief, to grow, evolve, and create a future you can truly look forward to. Here's your host, Master Certified Life Coach, grief expert, widow, and mom, Krista St-Germain.
Hey there, welcome to another episode of the podcast. I don't know where summer is going. It is past the midpoint of July, and it's almost time for Heather's Camp, which, if you've never heard me talk about that, it is probably my favorite time of year. Heather's Camp is a camp for kids who are blind or visually impaired, and some friends of mine and I helped create it in 2000. Here we are in 2024. But in 2000, after our sorority sister Heather was killed, we wanted to figure out a way to do something in her memory and also make it about service. And so it is a summer camp program that attempts to provide the most normal summer camp experience possible for kids who also happen to be blind or visually impaired. And it is such a great time. I absolutely love it. And here we are. It's coming up on Heather's Camp time. Also, Heather's Camp was where we were returning from when my husband Hugo's accident happened. So it's both my favorite time of year and also it is emotionally loaded. We don't actually go to the same campsite anymore. We've switched camps and we go to one that is different that Hugo never went to. However, I still am on that same road going back and forth to camp, and he was killed when we were coming back from camp. That's when I had the flat tires when we were on our way home. So also hard to believe it's coming up on 8 years since he died. 8 years feels like, I always say this, but it feels like yesterday and also so far away. But 'tis that time of year. What else is going on? I am intentionally taking more time away from social media. And I just want to encourage you. This has nothing to do with today's podcast topic, but if you are listening to this in 2024, it is an election year. And sometimes, grief or no grief, social media can be just hard on us. And so if you don't feel uplifted when you get off of social media, it's okay to take breaks. It's okay to get off social media. You got to take care of you. And so whether it's because, you're seeing all the things that other people are experiencing that you aren't, given what's going on since your person died, or maybe it's about the election and it feels like there's just a lot of either divide or isolation happening. I am taking a break. I want to encourage us to all take really good care of ourselves as it relates to social media in the election year and grief. And the other thing that's going on, which I would love your opinion about, but is that I am contemplating a little bit of a pivot. It's been weighing on me for so long that when I came up with Mom Goes On, it really was never about parenting for me. It was never about, I want to work specifically with moms on parenting, widowed moms on parenting. It was really, I was trying to figure out a way to speak to the women who were like me at that point. And it wasn't about age, although I think it probably felt that way. It was more about desire to live. It was more about the women who weren't done living and how could I reach them? And I didn't really have the right language for that. And so I just decided to call it Mom Goes On in the Widowed Mom podcast. But it feels like it's so much more than that to me. And sometimes I get, I don't know, several emails in a week where people are saying, I don't think I quite qualify because my kids are grown. No, you totally qualify. It's not even about parenting as much as it is about, we are women who we have the desire to keep living and we don't resonate with the idea of being older and done living. So I've been thinking about this. What do I want to do about it? How do I want to change it? But what do you think? Do you have ideas? If you do, email them to me, Krista@coachingwithkrista.com, or we can connect on Instagram @lifecoachkrista or Facebook, Coaching with Krista. But I'd love to know what you think. I think there's a lot of women out there who don't identify, like their primary identity is not mom. but yet they are a widow. But maybe they aren't, they're like me, where it wasn't really about parenting. Not that we don't love our kids, we do. And sometimes we want support as it relates to parenting, but that isn't the main thing. And that's what I'm trying to figure out for myself. So that's what's on my mind. All right, let's jump into the topic for the week. I wanted to talk about the situations where your in laws don't agree. And this comes up in coaching over and over and over. And listen, if you're not struggling with your in laws, that's fine. Insert the person or people who you are struggling with and take this information and use it for that. If you are struggling with your in laws, you are not alone. It is so common. And if that's the only thing you take away from this episode, even that I think is valuable, because sometimes we just do feel so alone. But oh my gosh, how many times have I coached people, women, widows, who are struggling with their in laws? So I'm going to talk about some of the reasons I think we struggle. And then I have 10 or 11 things that I want to offer that I think can be helpful for you if you are a person who is struggling with their in laws after your person died. So sometimes we're struggling because our spouse, partner, person played a role of like mediator, or, they were the ones that ran interference between us and our in-laws. And now they aren't here anymore to do that. Sometimes they were the ones that said, hey, don't worry about their opinion. Like, we've got this, we're together. All that matters is that we like our decisions, it doesn't matter. Sometimes, I hear the stories of, I don't know how my person actually escaped that family being so level-headed, because the whole family is different. And it was a joke when they were living, but now that they're not living anymore and you're the one feeling like you are left to deal with people who you don't relate to and who maybe your partner didn't even relate to, it can be a lot. Also, there can be a generational gap, just a different generation, and have different beliefs and opinions about how children should be raised and how decisions should be made. And so even that in and of itself can be challenging. And also they might have a different experience of grief than you have. I mean, for sure, they haven't had your exact experience of grief. No one has. But also, they may think that they know better because of their lived experiences with grief. And that might have you on different pages. So, regardless of what it is, whether they are opinionated about how you are parenting or your life choices, or whether you're dating again, or how you spend the holidays, or how often you invite them over or don't, whatever it is, here are 10 things that I want to offer that might help. Also, I will tell you, I have done several episodes of the podcast that are on related subjects. So we have talked about boundaries and manuals. We've talked about dealing with toxic people. We've talked about when other people don't agree. We've talked about dealing with difficult family members. So scroll back through some of the podcast episodes. And of course, you can always go to coachingwithkrista.com and click on the podcast tab. And there you will find a search bar, and you can search by subject and find podcast episodes that way. But just know that we've talked about dealing with different people and the challenges of that in grief on multiple episodes if you want more help. So, okay. The first thing I want to offer you is that if your person had great thoughts about your in-laws that made dealing with your in-laws easier, I want to remind you that you can leverage the thoughts that your person had. So if your person was famous for saying, it doesn't matter, right? Don't worry about their opinion. That was an automatic thought for them that helped them. You can start to think like them. If their thoughts would help you, give yourself permission to start believing the thoughts that they thought about their family, because sometimes that can help. Sometimes it can be a great reminder of what they thought about it, right? And can help us stay in perspective. So give yourself permission to consider, how did they think about their parents? And what if I thought about them in that way too? Would that help me? And if the answer is yes, and it would move you toward the experience you want, by all means, give yourself permission to leverage the thoughts that your person had about their family. You can think them too. The second thing is to let them have their opinions. This is so freeing when we just decide that other people can have their opinions and other people can not like our choices, and that them not liking our choices and having opinions that are different than ours doesn't make us wrong or bad. That can be such freedom in that. And believe it or not, a lot of the mental gymnastics that we do as it relates to in-laws is because we think that in order for us to feel good, they need to agree with us or understand us or validate us or share our opinion. And so we try like crazy to get them to see where we're coming from, to get them to like how we're doing things, to get them to validate our opinions because we think it's the answer to us feeling good. So if that resonates with you, first, listen, you are not alone, right? We all have primitive software in our mind that says the importance and validation of other people's opinions matters. And without it, it could be dangerous. We associate rejection with death. The old part of our brain does. We're not going to take that away. We're not going to take that association away, but we can decide how we want to respond to it. We can decide not to give that reaction so much weight. We can figure out how to feel okay and validate ourselves when we aren't getting validation from other people. So I promise you, you are 100% worthy and lovable and respectable and trustworthy and intelligent and capable and all the things. Whether your in-laws see it or not, you are those things. When you get really practiced at validating yourself and being super proud of how you are showing up and the decisions you are making and the way you are living, it will be easier to let them disagree and have their own opinions. And I don't say that to imply that it is easy. For some of us, it's never easy, but it can get easier. It's like a muscle. You can literally practice something that you don't think they would like. Maybe there's something that you say or could imagine yourself saying. Maybe it's about parenting, maybe it's about a decision. You can imagine yourself saying it and being proud of yourself as you say it or responding in the way that you want, even if you're sensing that they are disappointed in you or rejecting the way that you're doing it or don't like it. You can let their own disappointment be there, let their opinion be there, and practice being proud of yourself as you live your life the way you want to live it. That can be done. They really don't need to change. You can just let them have their opinions. Okay. If you have someone who seems hell-bent on competing in the grief Olympics with you, right? Like they're in total grief comparison of how their grief is worse than yours. And sometimes I see this happen with mother-in-laws in particular, where perhaps they have also lost their spouse and now they have lost a child. And they will say things like, well, not only did I lose my husband like you did, but I've also lost my son. So you can't possibly know what I'm going through. And we play grief comparison. My pain is worse than your pain. And you might notice yourself wanting to do this too. Okay. This is usually a sign that we've got some pain that we don't perceive has been witnessed. And we're looking for someone to witness it, for someone to say, I see you. This is hard. I get it. And I'm not encouraging grief comparison. We aren't going to give out medals at the Grief Olympics. There is no such thing. But it can be easier to understand, specifically if it's your mother-in-law, or anyone really, but when you can tell that someone is comparing their grief to yours, it's just probably a sign that they haven't felt fully understood. And that's not on you. So I'm not saying you are going to solve this. That's not it. But it can be easier to not want to punch them when they are comparing their grief to your grief, when you realize that the whole reason we get into the grief comparison game in the first place is because we're hurting. We're hurting. And if the hurt in you can see the hurt in them, then sometimes it can be easier to just make space for the hurt. Not because you're going to solve it, not because you need to be that person for them, but because the part of you that has hurt and is hurting understands what it's like when your hurt isn't understood. And just the little switches like that can be so helpful. You also might find and look for the root of the problem. Again, not because you need to change, but because sometimes when we understand why, right, when we get curious about what's really going on here, we see their behavior, we hear the words that they're saying. But when we can get curious about why are they saying it? What are they feeling that has them speaking to me like this? What might they be thinking that has them feeling that way? How do they see the world that is different than the way that I see the world that makes their behavior make sense? Again, not because we're saying it's okay, not because we might not want to have a boundary, more on that in a minute, but because it's just helpful when we can understand, oh, they see the world in this way. They see, they think that it's not okay to talk about emotion, right? Maybe they grew up thinking that. Maybe they think it's not okay to involve your child in decisions. Maybe they grew up thinking that. Like, where are they coming from? Where is the root of the disagreement? Do they have different values than you? Do they think or believe different things about different grief responses? Are they so hell-bent on maintaining a particular tradition because they think that their relationship with their child is dependent upon maintaining that tradition? Right? Do they think their connection is hanging in the balance? It might not make sense to you because it might not be how you see the world, but it might make a lot of sense to them. And if you can get curious about the root of what's happening here, it can be easier to have empathy. And then when we have empathy, I think it gets even easier to let them have their perspective and also set and uphold boundaries. Sometimes people think that if we have empathy for someone else, if we understand where they're coming from, if we accept their behavior, that means we'll just tolerate it and we won't do anything about it. Or they confuse accepting what's going on with condoning it. And that's not what I'm talking about. What I mean is when we understand where someone is coming from, it will make more sense to us. It will naturally make us more empathetic. It will make it easier to connect with them. And also then, right, it's so much easier to see someone's humanness and to relate to them as a human, which just feels better. But then also, we can hold a boundary. And when I teach boundary, and I have a podcast episode that you can listen to on this, but when I teach boundaries, what I'm talking about is not things we do to try to get other people to change. It's things we do to take care of ourselves. So it's not, if you don't stop doing this, then I'm not going to let you see your grandchild. It's not something we're trying to do to get them to change. It's something we are doing to keep ourselves safe, or maybe our children safe. And so it could be very similar in that we might say, hey, listen, if the next time, if you question my decision making in front of the child, right, or tell them, I don't know what it is, right, then I'm going to excuse myself from the conversation. Right? It is something we do in response to something someone else does, not with the intention of changing them, but with the intention of taking care of us. That could mean going no contact. Ultimately, I don't know. So having empathy doesn't mean we can't do that. We can still do that, right? We can still have a boundary and decide This is how we operate, independent of how they operate. And that gets easier when we have empathy for them, I think. It's also useful to communicate with I statements. Sometimes when emotions are heated, it can be so easy to default to the, well, you, blah, 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 right? You, and then there's usually some sort of always, never, generalized or overgeneralized statement. You make me feel this, that, and the other, right? You don't respect my choices, as opposed to the kind of communication that happens when we focus on I statements. So when you say, my husband wouldn't approve of that choice, when you say, well, do you think that, so and so would like what you're doing right now? I hear, right, that you don't respect my choices. We use I statements. So consider I statements. Make sure that you have good support systems outside of your in-laws. And for most of us, this is probably not a big issue. But if you really went to your person all the time, right? They were your support system. Sometimes we really do need to look at, what are my support systems outside of this primary relationship that I had, marriage or partnership, and outside of my family, my in-laws? Do I need to beef up my support systems? So that might mean friends. That might mean support groups. That might mean a therapist, right? You can have a team of support. That can be a lot of different things. Create it as you want it. But make sure that if you're noticing an imbalance, you were spending all your time with your husband or partner or all your time with your in-laws, that this could be an opportunity to branch out. Because when you have support systems that are not just those core family members, those people can back you and give you advice without having a dog in the race. So make sure you have those support systems. I also want to suggest that you really consider picking your battles. Decide what really matters to you. What is worth standing firm on? Which hill are you going to die on? And where do you want to be more flexible? And I don't say that because I'm encouraging you to roll over. Again, I'm saying that because you only have so much energy and bandwidth. And sometimes it's just easier to let what feels like to you as little stuff, to let the little stuff just fall off to the wayside. So consider picking your battles. What is really important to you? And then gently, perhaps, and if so, oh so gently, consider educating your in-laws about the different ways that people navigate grief and the importance of letting people have their own experience, if that seems like it's relevant to the struggle that you might be experiencing. I have an episode of this podcast called For Those Who Love Us. That might be a great place to start. Some of the myths of grief episodes might be really helpful. Keep in mind, you know so much more, whether you're in one of my, programs or not, just because you are listening to this podcast, you know so much more than most people do about grief. Many people are still thinking that it's formulaic and stage-based and there's an end to it and you've got to get to acceptance. And they've got very narrow ideas of the right way to think about grief and the wrong way to think about grief. And we want to have compassion for that because we have all been there. And also we want to recognize the challenges that can create. And I want to encourage you, if there's value in it for you and if you can do it gently and you think it will be helpful, to consider ways of educating. Let this podcast be a great resource to you if that feels right. And then the thing I want to close with, and this is the most important to me of the whole thing, is self-care, self-care, self-care. And by that, I do not mean manicures and pedicures and massages, although I do all three of those things and I love them. What I really mean is saying no when no feels like the right thing to say. Living in accordance with what you prioritize, what you value, with what matters to you. Making choices that feel right to you, even when it's so hard because those people that you care about disagree and because your primitive brain is screaming at you that you need their acceptance or approval. Even if you have a history of people pleasing and doing it the way that other people want it done, even if you have been socialized in a faith tradition that says you know nothing and other people know everything. This is what I'm talking about with self-care is we have to figure out ways. This is not selfish. This is not a nice to have. This is fundamental, foundational mental well-being. This is required in order for us to parent effectively. This is an opportunity for us to show our children how it's done. Because a lot of us didn't see that from our parents, specifically our moms, right? Our moms may not have been able to show us what real self-care looked like because nobody showed it to them. And when we learn it, we can demonstrate it. So, yes, it's hard when your in-laws don't agree with you. And you don't need them to agree with you to be happy. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and for your kids is to say no and to do it your way. So I give you permission to step even more into that. Not that you need it from me, you don't, but sometimes it just helps to hear it. Let yourself step into even more self-validation, self-love, reminding yourself your self-worth is not negotiable. It was given to you at birth. You are respectable. You are trustworthy. You are capable. Now, are you perfect? No. Do you need to be perfect to love yourself? Also, no. A big fat no, in fact, right? We're all imperfect and we can all still validate and take amazing care of ourselves, even when it means letting other people disagree and not understand. And it's such an important thing. And I really want you to give yourself permission to do more and more of it. More and more of it. All right. That's what I have for you this week. Remember, I love you. You've got this. Take care, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye. If you like what you've been hearing on this podcast and want to create a future you can truly get excited about even after the loss of your spouse, I invite you to join my Mom Goes On coaching program. It's small group coaching just for widowed moms like you, where I'll help you figure out what's holding you back and give you the tools and support you need so you can move forward with confidence. Please don't settle for a new normal that's less than what you deserve. Go to coachingwithkrista.com and click Work With Me for details and next steps. I can't wait to meet you.